Hello there, this is Impact. I'm Nancy Kachingira. Key European leaders make a show of support for Ukraine, visiting a town which suffered Russian atrocities. How the Bitcoin boom has turned into a slump in El Salvador, which has poured millions into getting citizens to use it for everyday transactions. And researchers believe they have discovered the origins of the Black Death, more than 600 years after it killed tens of millions in Europe, Asia, and North Africa. That's all coming up on Impact. Welcome to the program. Thanks very much for joining us. Let's tell you about our top story. The leaders of Germany, France, Italy and Romania are visiting Ukraine in a show of European solidarity as Ukraine calls for Europe to step up its weapons supply. Here's President Zelensky with President Macron and German Chancellor Scholz. The Italian Prime Minister is also in Kiev. But how much appetite is there back in their own countries in supporting Ukraine so openly, especially with the rising economic cost of the war? Let's get the view from France, Germany and Italy.
Here in France, a lot of papers are pointing out, rather wryly, that there is apparently now a new word in Ukrainian and indeed Russian, makronit, a verb meaning to talk to no purpose or to make all sorts of promises without actually doing anything, which I think goes to show the extent with which Macron's star has fallen in Ukraine. And a lot of this trip is about trying to re-establish his credentials there. Le Monde's correspondent in Kiev says that in 4 months, Macron has gone from being a very popular leader to being the most unpopular leader among Ukraine's allies. So a lot at stake here. I mean, obviously, what the Ukrainians hold against him most is this impression they have that he's being very indulgent towards Vladimir Putin, that he's holding out for some sort of compromise territorially, that he's too eager not to humiliate Vladimir Putin. When they say that the situation has moved on from there, they're also, I think, very mistrustful of Macron's talk about a sort of common European political framework, short of membership of the EU.
Here in Germany, there is overwhelming support for Ukraine. You can see that in the polls, but also in the generous welcome that Germany has given almost 1 million refugees coming from Ukraine so far. But when it comes to the issue of sending tanks and heavy weapons to Ukraine, that is incredibly controversial. It divides voters, and the situation is not helped by the fact that German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is accused of being unclear and hesitant in what he wants to send to Ukraine when it comes to tanks and heavy weapons in particular. So he's under immense pressure here in Germany to be clearer and to do more to help Ukraine. He originally said he wouldn't visit Kiev during the war simply for a photo op. He would only go when he had something concrete to offer President Zelensky. So expectations about this trip are high.
Here in Italy, the war in Ukraine has actually exposed some divisions and fault lines. Yes, there's widespread public solidarity with the people of Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression, reinforced by the fact that there was already a very large Ukrainian community here in Italy before the war. But it's also one of the EU members most dependent on Russian gas, and there's significant Italian business interest in Russia. So it was seen as a little hesitant at the start of the war about sanctions towards Moscow. Also, some right-wing political figures here, Silvio Berlusconi and the hard-right leader Matteo Salvini, have had close relations with Vladimir Putin. That, combined with the fact that some Russian figures have been given a relatively easy ride in the Italian media in the last few weeks, have helped create an environment in which most Italians say they're against sending arms to Ukraine. And for a Russian president keen to exploit any divisions within the EU, Italy is sometimes seen as one of the bloc's weakest links.
So that's the view there from France, Germany and Italy. Let's talk about this more now. Joining me from Brussels is Dr. Ian Lesser, Vice President of the influential think tank, the German Marshall Fund. Thank you very much for talking to us. Let's start with why these 3 leaders have chosen to travel to Kiev now. What's your assessment?
Well, I think operationally the war has reached a stage where it's very clear that it's not going to end anytime soon. And in fact, the balance isn't looking as favorable for Ukraine as it might have been a few weeks ago. And so I think there's a lot of pressure on European leaders to reinforce their solidarity with Ukraine, but also to address some of the longer term issues that are really looming about the political future of Ukraine with Europe, but also about the contours of a potential ceasefire in Ukraine. I think it's an important moment for the three leaders to show up in Kyiv, but also to show up together. That's an important signal.
Now, President Zelensky has been critical of France, of Germany in the past, taken issue with the slowness of Germany helping with weapons, and also Ukraine has highlighted how France has said that Russia should not be humiliated. Is this a chance to mend that relationship? And by getting this close to Ukraine, does that mean they're no longer speaking to Russia the way they were before?
Well, I think it does signal a shift. I think, especially for President Macron, I think there is the desire to be very clear in a way that perhaps he hasn't always been about where French interests and French intentions lie with regard to the war. And I think he's being clearer about that. There is, of course, this gap that Ukraine is very concerned about between commitments that have been made and what has actually been delivered. And as the operational conditions become tougher for Ukraine in the east and in the south, this takes on a real edge. So I think, it's very important for all sides to see what comes out of these meetings.
So it's interesting that you're describing a shift there, because there seems to have been a shift in attitudes as well, even as the consequences of this crisis continue to mount, rising prices, inflation all around the world. How much appetite is there for actions that actually might prolong this war?
Well, this is really a deep question for Europe above all. It also applies in the United States and elsewhere. But the fact that this is clearly not going to be over anytime soon presents us all with a different set of challenges. And there is this very real question about whether, especially European cohesion within NATO, can be maintained if this is not something that is a short-term crisis to be managed, but in fact a durable conflict and a durable confrontation with Russia. There are, as you said, commercial interests. There is deep discomfort in Europe, of course, with threats to European territory, but also with war on European soil. And there's a much tougher debate, I think, underway about what we would like to see, what Europe would like to see at the end of the day as an end to this conflict, and what price Europe is willing to pay to contain Russian power.
Dr. Ian Lesser, thank you. That does give us a flavour of the tough negotiations that will be going on. Dr. Lesser is from the German Marshall Fund. Now, the slump in digital currency